Chapter 12 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 12. Concentrated Energy. This one thing I do. St. Paul. The one prudence in life is concentration. The one evil is dissipation. And it makes no difference whether our dissipations are coarse or fine. Everything is good which takes away one plaything, and delusion more, and sends us home to add one stroke of faithful work. Emerson. The man who seeks one thing in life, and but one, may hope to achieve it before life be done. But he who seeks all things wherever he goes, only reaps from the hopes which around him he sows, a harvest of barren regrets. Owen Meredith. The longer I live, the more deeply am I convinced that that which makes the difference between one man and another, between the weak and powerful, the great and insignificant, is energy, invincible determination, a purpose once formed, and then death or victory. Fowell Buxton. There was not enough room for us all in Frankfurt, said Nathan Mayer Rothschild in speaking of himself and his four brothers. I dealt in English goods. One great trader came there, who had the market to himself. He was quite the great man, and did us a favor if he sold us goods. Somehow I offended him, and he refused to show me his patterns. This was on a Tuesday. I said to my father, I will go to England. On Thursday I started. The nearer I got to England, the cheaper goods were. As soon as I got to Manchester, I laid out all my money. Things were so cheap, and I made a good profit. I hope, said a listener, that your children are not too fond of money and business to the exclusion of more important things. I am sure you would not wish that. I am sure I would wish that, said Rothschild. I wish them to give mind and soul and heart and body and everything to business. That is the way to be happy. Stick to one business, young man, he added, addressing a young brewer. Stick to your brewery, and you may be the great brewer of London. But be a brewer and a banker and a merchant and a manufacturer, and you will soon be in the Gazette. Not many things indifferently, but one thing supremely, is the demand of the hour. He who scatters his efforts in this intense, concentrated age cannot hope to succeed. Goods removed, messages taken, carpets beaten, and poetry composed on any subject, was the sign of a man in London who was not very successful at any one of these lines of work, and reminds one of Monsieur Canard of Paris, a public scribe who digests accounts, explains the language of flowers, and sells fried potatoes. The great difference between those who succeed and those who fail does not consist in the amount of work done by each, but in the amount of intelligent work. Many of those who fail most ignominiously do enough to achieve grand success, but they labor at haphazard, building up with one hand only to tear down with the other. They do not grasp circumstances and change them into opportunities. They have no faculty of turning honest defeats into telling victories. With ability enough and time in abundance, the warp and woof of success, they are forever throwing back and forth an empty shuttle, and the real web of life is never woven. If you ask one of them to state his aim and purpose in life, he will say, I hardly know yet for what I am best adapted, but I am a thorough believer in genuine hard work, and I am determined to dig early and late all my life, and I know I shall come across something, either gold, silver, or at least iron. I say most emphatically no. Would an intelligent man dig up a whole continent to find its veins of silver and gold? The man who is forever looking about to see what he can find never finds anything. If we look for nothing in particular, we find just that and no more. We find what we seek with all our heart. The bee is not the only insect that visits the flower, but it is the only one that carries honey away. It matters not how rich the materials we have gleaned from the years of our study and toil in youth, if we go out into life with no well-defined idea of our future work. There is no happy conjunction of circumstances that will arrange them into an imposing structure and give it magnificent proportions. What an immense power over the life, says Elizabeth Stuart Phelps Ward, is the power of possessing distinct aims. The voice, the dress, the look, the very motions of a person define and alter when he or she begins to live for a reason. I fancy that I can select in a crowded street the busy, blessed women who support themselves. They carry themselves with an air of conscious self-respect and self-content, which a shabby alpaca cannot hide, nor a bonnet of silk enhance, nor even sickness nor exhaustion quite drag out. It is said that the wind never blows fair for that sailor who knows not to what port he is bound. The weakest living creature, says Carlyle, by concentrating his powers on a single object, can accomplish something, whereas the strongest, by dispersing his over many, may fail to accomplish anything. The drop, by continually falling, bores its passage through the hardest rock. The hasty torrent rushes over it with hideous uproar, and leaves no trace behind. When I was young, I used to think it was thunder that killed men, said a shrewd preacher. But as I grew older, I found it was lightning. So I resolved to thunder less and lighten more. The man who knows one thing, and can do it better than anybody else, even if it only be the art of raising turnips, receives the crown he merits. If he raises the best turnips by reason of concentrating all his energy to that end, he is a benefactor to the race and is recognized as such. If a salamander be cut in two, the front part would run forward and the other backward. Such is the progress of him who divides his purpose. Success is jealous of scattered energies. No one can pursue a worthy object steadily and persistently with all the powers of his mind and yet make his life a failure. You can't throw a tallow candle through the side of a tent, but you can shoot it through an oak board. Melt a charge of shot into a bullet, and it can be fired through the bodies of 4 men. Focus the rays of the sun in winter, and you can kindle a fire with ease. The giants of the race have been men of concentration, who have struck sledgehammer blows in one place until they have accomplished their purpose. The successful men of today are men of one overmastering idea, one unwavering aim, men of single and intense purpose. Scatteration is the curse of American business life. Too many are like Douglas Jerrold's friend, who could converse in 24 languages, but had no ideas to express in any one of them. The only valuable kind of study, said Sydney Smith, is to read so heartily that dinner time comes 2 hours before you expected it. To sit with your Livy before you and hear the geese cackling that saved the Capitol, and to see with your own eyes the Carthaginian sutlers gathering up the rings of the Roman knights after the Battle of Cannae, and heaping them into bushels, and to be so intimately present at the actions you are reading of, that when anybody knocks at the door, it will take you 2 or 3 seconds to determine whether you are in your own study or on the plains of Lombardy, looking at Hannibal's weather-beaten face and admiring the splendor of his single eye. The one serviceable, safe, certain, remunerative, attainable quality in every study and pursuit is the quality of attention, said Charles Dickens. My own invention or imagination, such as it is, I can most truthfully assure you, would never have served me as it has, but for the habit of commonplace, humble, patient, daily, toiling, drudging attention. When asked on another occasion the secret of his success, he said, "I never put one hand to anything on which I could throw my whole self." "Be a whole man at everything," wrote Joseph Gurney to his son. "A whole man at study, in work, and in play. Don't dally with your purpose." "I go at what I am about," said Charles Kingsley, "as if there was nothing else in the world for the time being. That's the secret of all hard-working men, but most of them can't carry it into their amusements. Many a man fails to become a great man by splitting into several small ones, choosing to be a tolerable jack of all trades rather than to be an unrivaled specialist. Many persons, seeing me do much engaged in active life," said Edward Bulwer Lytton, "and as much about the world as if I had never been a student, have said to me, 'When do you get time to write all your books? How on earth do you contrive to do so much work?' I shall surprise you by the answer I made. The answer is this: I contrive to do so much by never doing too much at a time. A man to get through work well must not overwork himself, or, if he do too much today, the reaction of fatigue will come, and he will be obliged to do too little tomorrow. Now, since I began really and earnestly to study, which was not till I had left college and was actually in the world, I may perhaps say that I have gone through as large a course of general reading as most men of my time. I have traveled much, and I have seen much. I have mixed much in politics, and in the various business of life. And, in addition to all this, I have published somewhere about 60 volumes, some upon subjects requiring much special research. And what time do you think, as a general rule, I have devoted to study, to reading and writing? Not more than 3 hours a day. And when Parliament is sitting, not always that. But then, during these 3 hours, I have given my whole attention to what I was about." S.T. Coleridge possessed marvelous powers of mind, but he had no definite purpose. He lived in an atmosphere of mental dissipation which consumed his energy, exhausted his stamina, and his life was in many respects a miserable failure. He lived in dreams and died in reverie. He was continually forming plans and resolutions, but to the day of his death they remained simply resolutions and plans. He was always just going to do something, but never did it. "Coleridge is dead," wrote Charles Lamb to a friend, "and is said to have left behind him about 40,000 treatises on metaphysics and divinity, not one of them complete." Every great man has become great, every successful man has succeeded, in proportion as he has confined his powers to one particular channel. Hogarth would rivet his attention upon a face and study it until it was photographed upon his memory, when he could reproduce it at will. He studied and examined each object as eagerly as though he would never have a chance to see it again, and this habit of close observation enabled him to develop his work with marvelous detail. The very modes of thought of the time in which he lived were reflected from his works. He was not a man of great education or culture, except in his power of observation. With an immense procession passing up Broadway, the streets lined with people and bands playing lustily, Horace Greeley would sit upon the steps of the Astor House, use the top of his hat for a desk, and write an editorial for the New York Tribune, which would be quoted far and wide. Offended by a pungent article, a gentleman called at the Tribune office and inquired for the editor. He was shown into a little 7-by-9 sanctum, where Greeley, with his head close down to his paper, sat scribbling away at a 2:40 rate. The angry man began by asking if this was Mr. Greeley. "Yes, sir. What do you want?" said the editor quickly, without once looking up from his paper. The irate visitor then began using his tongue, with no regard for the rules of propriety, good breeding, or reason. Meantime, Mr. Greeley continued to write. Page after page was dashed off in the most impetuous style, with no change of features and without his paying the slightest attention to the visitor. Finally, after about 20 minutes of the most impassioned abuse ever poured out in an editor's office, the angry man became disgusted and abruptly turned to walk out of the room. Then, for the first time, Mr. Greeley quickly looked up, rose from his chair, and slapping the gentleman familiarly on his shoulder, in a pleasant tone of voice, said, "Don't go, friend. Sit down, and free your mind. It will do you good. You will feel better for it. Besides, it helps me to think what I am to write about. Don't go." One unwavering aim has ever characterized successful men. "Daniel Webster," said Sydney Smith, "struck me much like a steam engine in trousers." As Adams suggests, Lord Brougham, like Canning, had too many talents, and, though as a lawyer he gained the most splendid prize of his profession, the Lord Chancellorship of England, and merited the applause of scientific men for his investigations in science, yet his life on the whole was a failure. He was everything by turns and nothing long. With all his magnificent abilities, he left no permanent mark on history or literature, and actually outlived his own fame. Miss Martineau says Lord Brougham was at his chateau at Caen when the daguerreotype process first came into vogue. An artist undertook to take a view of the chateau with a group of guests on the balcony. His lordship was asked to keep perfectly still for 5 seconds, and he promised that he would not stir. But alas, he moved. The consequence was that there was a blur where Lord Brougham should have been. There is something, continued Miss Martineau, very typical in this, in the picture of our century as taken from the life by history. This very man should have been the central figure, but owing to his want of steadfastness, there will be forever a blur where Lord Brougham should have been. How many lives are blurs for want of concentration and steadfastness of purpose? Fowell Buxton attributed his success to ordinary means and extraordinary application, and being a whole man to one thing at a time. It is ever the unwavering pursuit of a single aim that wins. Non multa sed multum. Not many things, but much, was Coke's motto. It is the almost invisible point of a needle, the keen, slender edge of a razor or an axe, that opens the way for the bulk that follows. Without point or edge, the bulk would be useless. It is the man of one line of work, the sharp-edged man, who cuts his way through obstacles and achieves brilliant success. While we should shun that narrow devotion to one idea which prevents the harmonious development of our powers, We should avoid, on the other hand, the extreme versatility of one of whom W.M. Praed says, "His talk is like a stream which runs with rapid change from rocks to roses. It slips from politics to puns. It glides from Mahomet to Moses, beginning with the laws that keep the planets in their radiant courses, and ending with some precept deep for skinning eels or shoeing horses." If you can get a child learning to walk to fix his eyes on any object, he will generally navigate to that point without capsizing, but distract his attention, and down he goes. The young man seeking a position today is not asked what college he came from or who his ancestors were. What can you do is the great question. It is special training that is wanted. Most of the men at the head of great firms and great enterprises have been promoted step by step from the bottom. "I know that he can toil terribly," said Cecil of Walter Raleigh in explanation of the latter's success. "As a rule, what the heart longs for, the head and the hands may attain. The currents of knowledge, of wealth, of success, are as certain and fixed as the tides of the sea. In all great successes we can trace the power of concentration, riveting every faculty upon one unwavering aim, perseverance in the pursuit of an undertaking, in spite of every difficulty, and courage which enables one to bear up under all trials, disappointments, and temptations. Chemists tell us that there is power enough in a single acre of grass to drive all the mills and steam cars in the world, could we but concentrate it upon the pistol rod of a steam engine. But it is at rest, and so, in the light of science, it is comparatively valueless. Dr. Matthews says that the man who scatters himself upon many objects soon loses his energy, and with his energy, his enthusiasm. "Never study on speculation," says Waters. "All such study is vain. Form a plan, have an object, then work for it. Learn all you can about it, and you will be sure to succeed. What I mean by studying on speculation is that aimless learning of things, because they may be useful some day, which is like the conduct of the woman who bought at auction a brass door plate with the name of Thompson on it, thinking it might be useful some day. Definiteness of aim is characteristic of all true art. He is not the greatest painter who crowds the greatest number of ideas upon a single canvas, giving all the figures equal prominence. He is the genuine artist who makes the greatest variety express the greatest unity, who develops the leading idea in the central figure, and makes all the subordinate figures, lights, and shades point to that center and find expression there. So in every well-balanced life, no matter how versatile in endowments or how broad in culture, there is one grand central purpose in which all the subordinate powers of the soul are brought to a focus, and where they will find fit expression. In nature, we see no waste of energy, nothing left to chance. Since the shuttle of creation shot for the first time through chaos, design has marked the course of every golden thread. Every leaf, every flower, every crystal, every atom even, has a purpose stamped upon it, which unmistakably points to the crowning summit of all creation, man. Young men are often told to aim high, but we must aim at what we would hit. A general purpose is not enough. The arrow shot from the bow does not wander around to see what it can hit on its way, but flies straight to the mark. The magnetic needle does not point to all the lights in the heavens to see which it likes best. They all attract it. The sun dazzles, the meteor beckons, the stars twinkle to it and try to win its affections. But the needle, true to its instinct, and with a finger that never errs in sunshine or in storm, points steadily to the North Star. For, while all the other stars must course with untiring tread around their great centers through all the ages, the North Star alone, distant beyond human comprehension, moves with stately sweep on its circuit of more than 25,000 years, for all practical purposes of man's stationary, not only for a day, but for a century. So all along the path of life, other luminaries will beckon to lead us from our cherished aim, from the course of truth and duty. But let no moon which shines with borrowed light, no meteors which dazzle but never guide, turn the needle of our purpose from the North Star of its hope. End of chapter 12. Concentrated Energy. Chapter 13 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 13. The Triumph of Enthusiasm. The labor we delight in, physics, pain. Shakespeare. The only conclusive evidence of a man's sincerity is that he gives himself for a principle. Words, money, all things else are comparatively easy to give away. But when a man makes a gift of his daily life and practice, it is plain that the truth, whatever it may be, has taken possession of him. Lowell. Let us beware of losing our enthusiasm. Let us ever glory in something, and strive to retain our admiration for all that would ennoble, and our interest in all that would enrich and beautify our life. Phillips Brooks. In the Galerie des Beaux-Arts in Paris is a beautiful statue conceived by a sculptor who was so poor that he lived and worked in a small garret. When his clay model was nearly done, a heavy frost fell upon the city. He knew that if the water in the interstices of the clay should freeze, the beautiful lines would be distorted. So he wrapped his bedclothes around the clay image. In the morning, he was found dead, but his idea was saved, and other hands gave it enduring form in marble. I do not know how it is with others when speaking on an important question, said Henry Clay, but on such occasions I seem to be unconscious of the external world. Wholly engrossed by the subject before me, I lose all sense of personal identity, of time, or of surrounding objects. A bank never becomes very successful, says a noted financier, until it gets a president who takes it to bed with him. Enthusiasm gives the otherwise dry and uninteresting subject or occupation a new meaning. As the young lover has finer sense and more acute vision, and sees in the object of his affections 100 virtues, and charms invisible to all other eyes, so a man permeated with enthusiasm has his power of perception heightened and his vision magnified, until he sees beauty and charms others cannot discern, which compensate for drudgery, privations, hardships, and even persecution. Dickens says he was haunted, possessed, spirit-driven by the plots and characters in his stories, which would not let him sleep or rest until he had committed them to paper. On one sketch he shut himself up for a month, and when he came out he looked as haggard as a murderer. His characters haunted him day and night. Herr Kapellmeister, I should like to compose something. How shall I begin? Asked a youth of 12 who had played with great skill on the piano. "Pooh, pooh," replied Mozart. "You must wait." "But you began when you were younger than I am," said the boy. "Yes, so I did," said the great composer. "But I never asked anything about it. When one has the spirit of a composer, he writes because he can't help it." Gladstone said that what is really desired is to light up the spirit that is within a boy. In some sense and in some degree, in some effectual degree, there is in every boy the material of good work in the world. In every boy, not only in those who are brilliant, not only in those who are quick, but in those who are stolid, and even in those who are dull, or who seem to be dull. If they have only the good will, the dullness will day by day clear away and vanish completely under the influence of the good will. Gerster, an unknown Hungarian, made fame and fortune sure the first night she appeared in opera. Her enthusiasm almost hypnotized her auditors. In less than a week, she had become popular and independent. Her soul was smitten with a passion for growth, and all the powers of her heart and mind she possessed were enthusiastically devoted to self-improvement. All great works of art have been produced when the artist was intoxicated with the passion for beauty and form, which would not let him rest until his thought was expressed in marble or on canvas. "Well, I've worked hard enough for it," said Malibran, when a critic expressed his admiration of her D in alt, reached by running up 3 octaves from low D. "I've been chasing it for a month. I pursued it everywhere. When I was dressing, when I was doing my hair, and at last I found it on the toe of a shoe that I was putting on." "Every great and commanding moment in the annals of the world," says Emerson, "is the triumph of some enthusiasm. The victories of the Arabs after Mahomet, who, in a few years, from a small and mean beginning, established a larger empire than that of Rome, is an example. They did, they knew not what. The naked Derar, horsed on an idea, was found an overmatch for a troop of cavalry. The women fought like men and conquered the Roman men. They were miserably equipped, miserably fed, but they were temperance troops. There was neither brandy nor flesh needed to feed them. They conquered Asia and Africa and Spain on barley. The Caliph Omar's walking stick struck more terror into those who saw it than another man's sword. It was enthusiasm that enabled Napoleon to make a campaign in 2 weeks that would have taken another a year to accomplish. These Frenchmen are not men, they fly, said the Austrians in consternation. In 15 days, Napoleon, in his first Italian campaign, had gained 6 victories, taken 21 standards, 55 pieces of cannon, had captured 15,000 prisoners, and had conquered Piedmont. After this astonishing avalanche, a discomfited Austrian general said, "This young commander knows nothing whatever about the art of war. He is a perfect ignoramus. There is no doing anything with him." But his soldiers followed their little corporal with an enthusiasm which knew no defeat or disaster. "There are important cases," says A.H.K. Boyd, "in which the difference between half a heart and a whole heart makes just the difference between signal defeat and a splendid victory." "Should I die this minute," said Nelson at an important crisis, "want of frigates would be found written on my heart." The simple, innocent Maid of Orleans, with her sacred sword, her consecrated banner, and her belief in her great mission, sent a thrill of enthusiasm through the whole French army, such as neither king nor statesman could produce. Her zeal carried everything before it. Oh, what a great work each one could perform in this world, if he only knew his power! But, like a bitted horse, man does not realize his strength until he has once run away with himself. Underneath is laid the builder of this church and city, Christopher Wren, who lived more than 90 years, not for himself, but for the public good. Reader, if you seek his monument, look around. Turn where you will in London, you find noble monuments of the genius of a man who never received instruction from an architect. He built 55 churches in the city and 36 halls. I would give my skin for the architect's design of the lawofassumption, said he. When in Paris to get ideas for the restoration of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, his rare skill is shown in the palaces of Hampton Court and Kensington, in Temple Bar, Drury Lane Theatre, the Royal Exchange, and the Great Monument. He changed Greenwich Palace into a sailor's retreat, and built churches and colleges at Oxford. He also planned for the rebuilding of London after the Great Fire, but those in authority would not adopt his splendid idea. He worked 35 years upon his masterpiece, St. Paul's Cathedral. Although he lived so long and was exceedingly healthy in later life, he was so delicate as a child that he was a constant source of anxiety to his parents. His great enthusiasm alone seemed to give strength to his body. Indifference never leads armies that conquer, never models statues that live, nor breathes sublime music, nor harnesses the forces of nature, nor rears impressive architecture, nor moves the soul with poetry, nor the world with heroic philanthropies. Enthusiasm, as Charles Bell says of the hand, wrought the statue of Memnon and hung the brazen gates of Thebes. It fixed the mariner's trembling needle upon its axis, and first heaved the tremendous bar of the printing press. It opened the tubes for Galileo, until world after world swept before his vision, and it reefed the high topsail that rustled over Columbus in the morning breezes of the Bahamas. It has held the sword with which freedom has fought her battles, and poised the axe of the dauntless woodman as he opened the paths of civilization and turned the mystic leaves upon which Milton and Shakespeare inscribed their burning thoughts. Horace Greeley said that the best product of labor is the high-minded workman and an enthusiasm for his work. The best method is obtained by earnestness, said Salvini. If you can impress people with the conviction that you feel what you say, they will pardon many shortcomings. And above all, study, study, study. All the genius in the world will not help you along with any art unless you become a hard student. It has taken me years to master a single part. There is a go, a zeal, a furor, almost a fanaticism for one's ideals or calling, that is peculiar to our American temperament and life. You do not find this in tropical countries. It did not exist 50 years ago. It could not be found then, even on the London Exchange. But the influence of the United States and of Australia, where, if a person is to succeed, he must be on the jump with all the ardor of his being, has finally extended until what used to be the peculiar strength of a few great minds has now become characteristic of the leading nations. Enthusiasm is the being awake. It is the tingling of every fiber of one's being to do the work that one's heart desires. Enthusiasm made Victor Hugo lock up his clothes while writing Notre Dame, that he might not leave the work until it was finished. The great actor Garrick well illustrated it when asked by an unsuccessful preacher the secret of his power over audiences. You speak of eternal verities and what you know to be true as if you hardly believed what you were saying yourself, whereas I utter what I know to be unreal and untrue as if I did believe it in my very soul. When he comes into a room, every man feels as if he had taken a tonic and had a new lease of life, said a man when asked the reason for his selection, after he, with two companions, had written upon a slip of paper the name of the most agreeable companion he had ever met. He is an eager, vivid fellow, full of joy, bubbling over with spirits. His sympathies are quick as an electric flash. He throws himself into the occasion, whatever it may be, with his whole heart, said the second, in praise of the man of his choice. He makes the best of everything, said the third, speaking of his own most cherished acquaintance. The three were traveling correspondents of great English journals, who had visited every quarter of the world and talked with all kinds of men. The papers were examined, and all were found to contain the name of a prominent lawyer in Melbourne, Australia. If it were not for respect for human opinions, said Madame de Staël to M. Mole, I would not open my window to see the Bay of Naples for the first time, while I would go 500 leagues to talk with a man of genius whom I had not seen. Enthusiasm is that secret and harmonious spirit which hovers over the production of men, throwing the reader of a book or the spectator of a statue into the very ideal presence whence these works have originated. One moonlight evening in winter, writes the biographer of Beethoven, we were walking through a narrow street of Bonn. "Hush!" exclaimed the great composer, suddenly pausing before a little mean dwelling. "What sound is that?" "It is from my sonata in F hark. How well it is played!" In the midst of the finale there was a break, and a sobbing voice cried, "I cannot play any more. It is so beautiful. It is utterly beyond my power to do it justice. Oh, what would I not give to go to the concert at Cologne!" "Ah, my sister," said a second voice, "why create regrets when there is no remedy? We can scarcely pay our rent." "You are right," said the first speaker, "and yet I wish for once in my life to hear some really good music. But it is of no use." "Let us go in," said Beethoven. "Go in," I remonstrated, "but what should we go in for?" "I will play to her," replied my companion in an excited tone. "Here is feeling, genius, understanding. I will play to her, and she will understand it. Pardon me," he continued, as he opened the door and saw a young man sitting by a table, mending shoes, and a young girl leaning sorrowfully upon an old-fashioned piano. I heard music and was tempted to enter. I am a musician. I also overheard something of what you said. You wish to hear, that is, you would like, that is, shall I play for you?" "Thank you," said the shoemaker, "but our piano is so wretched, and we have no music." "No music!" exclaimed the composer. "How then does the young lady— I entreat your pardon," he added, stammering as he saw that the girl was blind. "I had not perceived before. Then you play by ear? But where do you hear the music, since you frequent no concerts?" "We lived at Bruhl for 2 years, and while there I used to hear a lady practicing near us. During the summer evenings her windows were generally open, and I walked to and fro outside to listen to her." Beethoven seated himself at the piano. Never during all the years I knew him did I hear him play better than to that blind girl and to her brother. Even the old instrument seemed inspired. The young man and woman sat as if entranced by the magical, sweet sounds that flowed out upon the air in rhythmical swell and cadence, until suddenly the flame of the single candle wavered, sank, flickered, and went out. The shutters were thrown open, admitting a flood of brilliant moonlight, but the player paused, as if lost in thought. "Wonderful man," said the shoemaker in a low tone, "who and what are you?" "Listen," replied the master, and he played the opening bars of the sonata in F. "Then you are Beethoven," burst from the young people in delighted recognition. "Oh, play to us once more," they added, as he rose to go. "Only once more." "I will improvise a sonata to the moonlight," said he, gazing thoughtfully upon the liquid stars shining so softly out of the depths of a cloudless winter sky. Then he played a sad and infinitely loving movement, which crept silently over the instrument, like the calm flow of moonlight over the earth. This was followed by a wild elfin passage in triple time, a sort of grotesque interlude, like the dance of fairies upon the lawn. Then came a swift, agitated ending, a breathless, hurrying, trembling movement, descriptive of flight and uncertainty and vague, impulsive terror, which carried us away on its rustling wings and left us all in emotion and wonder. "Farewell to you," he said, as he rose and turned toward the door. "You will come again?" asked the host and hostess in a breath. "Yes, yes," said Beethoven hurriedly. "I will come again and give the young lady some lessons. Farewell." Then to me he added, "Let us make haste back, that I may write out that sonata while I can yet remember it." We did return in haste, and not until long past the dawn of day did he rise from his table with the full score of the Moonlight Sonata in his hand. Michelangelo studied anatomy 12 years, nearly ruining his health, but this course determined his style, his practice, and his glory. He drew his figures in skeleton, added muscles, fat, and skin successively, and then draped them. He made every tool he used in sculpture, such as files, chisels, and pincers. In painting, he prepared all his own colors, and would not let servants or students even mix them. Raphael's enthusiasm inspired every artist in Italy, and his modest, charming manners disarmed envy and jealousy. He has been called the only distinguished man who lived and died without an enemy or a detractor. Again and again, poor Bunyan might have had his liberty, but not the separation from his poor blind daughter Mary, which he said was like pulling the flesh from his bones, not the need of a poor family dependent upon him, not the love of liberty, nor the spur of ambition, could induce him to forego his plain preaching in public places. He had so forgotten his early education that his wife had to teach him again to read and write. It was the enthusiasm of conviction which enabled this poor, ignorant, despised Bedford tinker to write his immortal allegory with such fascination that a whole world has read it. Only thoughts that breathe in words that burn can kindle the spark slumbering in the heart of another. Rare consecration to a great enterprise is found in the work of the late Francis Parkman. While a student at Harvard, he determined to write the history of the French and English in North America. With a steadiness and devotion seldom equaled, he gave his life, his fortune, his all to this one great object. Although he had, while among the Dakota Indians, collecting material for his history, ruined his health, and could not use his eyes more than 5 minutes at a time for 50 years, he did not swerve a hair's breadth from the high purpose formed in his youth. until he gave to the world the best history upon the subject ever written. After Lincoln had walked 6 miles to borrow a grammar, he returned home and burned one shaving after another while he studied the precious prize. Gilbert Becket, an English crusader, was taken prisoner and became a slave in the palace of a Saracen prince, where he not only gained the confidence of his master, but also the love of his master's fair daughter. By and by he escaped and returned to England, but the devoted girl determined to follow him. She knew but 2 words of the English language, London and Gilbert, but by repeating the first, she obtained passage in a vessel to the great metropolis, and then she went from street to street pronouncing the other, Gilbert. At last she came to the street on which Gilbert lived in prosperity. The unusual crowd drew the family to the window, when Gilbert himself saw and recognized her, and took to his arms and home his far-come princess with her solitary, fond word. The most irresistible charm of youth is its bubbling enthusiasm. Youth sees no darkness ahead, no defileness that has no outlet. It forgets that there is such a thing as failure in the world, and believes that mankind has been waiting all these centuries for him to come and be the liberator of truth and energy and beauty. Of what use was it to forbid the boy Handel to touch a musical instrument, or to forbid him going to school, lest he learn the gamut? He stole midnight interviews with a dumb spinet in a secret attic. The boy Buck copied whole books of studies by moonlight, for want of a candle churlishly denied. Nor was he disheartened when these copies were taken from him. The painter West began in a garret and plundered the family cat for bristles to make his brushes. It is the enthusiasm of youth which cuts the Gordian knot age cannot untie. People smile at the enthusiasm of youth, says Charles Kingsley. That enthusiasm which they themselves secretly look back to with a sigh, perhaps unconscious that it is partly their own fault that they ever lost it. How much the world owes to the enthusiasm of Dante! Tennyson wrote his first volume at 18, and at 19 gained a medal at Cambridge. The most beautiful works of all art were done in youth, says Ruskin. Almost everything that is great has been done by youth, wrote Disraeli. The world's interests are, under God, in the hands of the young, says Dr. Trumbull. It was the youth Hercules that performed the 12 labors. Enthusiastic youth faces the sun, it shadows all behind it. The heart rules youth, the head manhood. Alexander was a mere youth when he rolled back to the Asiatic hordes that threatened to overwhelm European civilization almost at its birth. Napoleon had conquered Italy at 25. Byron and Raphael died at 37, an age which has been fatal to many a genius, and Poe lived but a few months longer. Romulus founded Rome at 20. Pitt and Bolingbroke were ministers almost before they were men. Gladstone was in Parliament in early manhood. Newton made some of his greatest discoveries before he was 25. Keats died at 25. Shelley at 29. Luther was a triumphant reformer at 25. It is said that no English poet ever equaled Chatterton at 21. Whitefield and Wesley began their great revival as students at Oxford, and the former had made his influence felt throughout England before he was 24. Victor Hugo wrote a tragedy at 15 and had taken 3 prizes at the Academy and gained the title of Master before he was 20. Many of the world's greatest geniuses never saw 40 years. Never before has the young man who is driven by his enthusiasm had such an opportunity as he has today. It is the age of young men and young women. Their ardor is their crown, before which the languid and the passive bow. But if enthusiasm is irresistible in youth, how much more so is it when carried into old age? Gladstone at 80 had 10 times the weight and power that any man of 25 would have with the same ideals. The glory of age is only the glory of its enthusiasm, and the respect paid to white hairs is reverence to a heart fervent in spite of the torpid influence of an enfeebled body. The Odyssey was the creation of a blind old man, but that old man was Homer. The contagious zeal of an old man, Peter the Hermit, rolled the chivalry of Europe upon the ranks of Islam. Dandolo, the Doge of Venice, won battles at 94 and refused a crown at 96. Wellington planned and superintended fortifications at 80. Bacon and Humboldt were enthusiastic students to the last gasp. Wise old Montaigne was shrewd in his grey-beard wisdom and loving life, even in the midst of his fits of gout and colic. Dr. Johnson's best work, The Lives of the Poets, was written when he was 78. Defoe was 58 when he published Robinson Crusoe. Newton wrote new briefs to his Principia at 83. Plato died writing at 81. Tom Scott began the study of Hebrew at 86. Galileo was nearly 70 when he wrote on the laws of motion. James Watt learned German at 85. Mrs. Somerville finished her Molecular and Microscopic Science at 89. Humboldt completed his Cosmos at 90, a month before his death. Burke was 35 before he obtained a seat in Parliament, yet he made the world feel his character. Unknown at 40, Grant was one of the most famous generals in history at 42. Eli Whitney was 23 when he decided to prepare for college, and 30 when he graduated from Yale. Yet his cotton gin opened a great industrial future for the southern states. What a power was Bismarck at 80! Lord Palmerston was an old boy to the last. He became Prime Minister of England the second time at 75 and died Prime Minister at 81. Galileo at 77, blind and feeble, was working every day, adapting the principle of the pendulum to clocks. George Stephenson did not learn to read and write until he had reached manhood. Some of Longfellow's, Whittier's, and Tennyson's best work was done after they were 70. At 63, Dryden began the translation of the Aeneid. Robert Hall learned Italian when past 60, that he might read Dante in the original. Noah Webster studied 17 languages after he was 50. Cicero said well that men are like wine. Age sours the bad and improves the good. With enthusiasm, we may retain the youth of the spirit until the hair is silvered, even as the Gulf Stream softens the rigors of northern Europe. How ages thine heart towards youth? If not, doubt thy fitness for thy work. End of chapter 13. The Triumph of Enthusiasm. Chapter 14 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 14. On Time, or The Triumph of Promptness. On the great clock of time there is but one word, now. Note the sublime precision that leads the earth over a circuit of 500 millions of miles back to the solstice at the appointed moment, without the loss of 1 second. No, not the millionth part of a second. For ages and ages of which it traveled that imperiled road. Edward Everett. Who cannot but see oftentimes how strange the threads of our destiny run? Oft it is only for a moment the favorable instant is presented. We miss it, and months and years are lost. By the street of by and by, one arrives at the house of never. Cervantes. Lose this day by loitering, 'twill be the same story tomorrow, and the next more dilatory. Let's take the instant by the ford top. Shakespeare. Haste, post, haste, haste for thy life, was frequently written upon messages in the days of Henry VIII of England, with a picture of a courier swinging from a gibbet. Post offices were unknown, and letters were carried by government messengers, subject to hanging if they delayed upon the road. Even in the old slow days of stagecoaches, when it took a month of dangerous traveling to accomplish the distance we can now span in a few hours, unnecessary delay was a crime. One of the greatest gains civilization has made is in measuring and utilizing time. We can do as much in an hour today as they could in 20 hours 100 years ago. Delays have dangerous ends. Caesar's delay to read a message cost him his life when he reached the Senate House. Colonel Raoul, the Hessian commander at Trenton, was playing cards when a messenger brought a letter stating that Washington was crossing the Delaware. He put the letter in his pocket without reading it until the game was finished, when he rallied his men only to die just before his troops were taken prisoners. Only a few minutes' delay, but he lost honor, liberty, life. Success is the child of two very plain parents, punctuality and accuracy. There are critical moments in every successful life when, if the mind hesitate or a nerve flinch, all will be lost. Immediately on receiving your proclamation, wrote Governor Andrew of Massachusetts to President Lincoln on May 3, 1861, we took up the war and have carried on our part of it in the spirit in which we believe the administrator and the American people intend to act, namely, as if there were not an inch of red tape in the world. He had received a telegram for troops from Washington on Monday, April 15th, at 9 o'clock the next Sunday. He said, "All the regiments demanded from Massachusetts are already either in Washington or in Fortress Monroe, or on their way to the defense of the capital. The only question which I can entertain," he said, "is what to do, and when that question is answered, the other is, what next to do." The whole period of youth, said Ruskin, is one essentially of formation, edification, instruction. There is not an hour of it but is trembling with destinies, not a moment of which once past the appointed work can ever be done again, or the neglected blow struck on the cold iron. Napoleon laid great stress upon that supreme moment, that nick of time, which occurs in every battle, to take advantage of which means victory, and to lose in hesitation means disaster. He said that he beat the Austrians because they did not know the value of 5 minutes. And it has been said that among the trifles that conspired to defeat him at Waterloo, the loss of a few moments by himself and Grouchy on the fatal morning was the most significant. Blucher was on time, and Grouchy was late. It was enough to send Napoleon to St. Helena, and to change the destiny of millions. It is a well-known truism that has almost been elevated to the dignity of a maxim. that what may be done at any time will be done at no time. The African Association of London wanted to send Ledward, the traveler, to Africa, and asked when he would be ready to go. "Tomorrow morning," was the reply. John Jervis, afterwards Earl St. Vincent, was asked when he could join his ship, and replied, "Directly." Colin Campbell, appointed commander of the army in India, and asked when he could set out, replied without hesitation, "Tomorrow." The energy wasted in postponing until tomorrow a duty of today would often do the work. How much harder and more disagreeable, too, it is to do work which has been put off! What would have been done at the time, with pleasure or even enthusiasm, after it has been delayed for days and weeks, becomes drudgery. Letters can never be answered so easily as when first received. Many large firms make it a rule never to allow a letter to lie unanswered overnight. Promptness takes the drudgery out of an occupation. Putting off usually means leaving off, and going to do becomes going undone. Doing a deed is like sowing a seed. If not done at just the right time, it will be forever out of season. The summer of eternity will not be long enough to bring to maturity the fruit of a delayed action. If a star or planet were delayed 1 second, it might throw the whole universe out of harmony. "There is no moment like the present," said Maria Edgeworth. Not only so, there is no moment at all, no instant force and energy but in the present. The man who will not execute his resolutions when they are fresh upon him can have no hopes from them afterward. They will be dissipated, lost in the hurry and scurry of the world, or sunk in the slough of indolence. Cobbett said he owed his success to being always ready, more than to all his natural abilities combined. "To this quality I owed my extraordinary promotion in the army," he said. "If I had to mount guard at 10, I was ready at 9. Never did any man or anything wait 1 minute for me." "How," asked a man of Sir Walter Raleigh, "do you accomplish so much and in so short a time?" "When I have anything to do, I go and do it," was the reply. The man who always acts promptly, even if he makes occasional mistakes, will succeed when a procrastinator, even if he have the better judgment, will fail. When asked how he managed to accomplish so much work, and at the same time attend to his social duties, a French statesman replied, "I do it simply by never postponing till tomorrow what should be done today." It was said of an unsuccessful public man that he used to reverse this process, his favorite maxim being, "Never to do today what might be postponed till tomorrow." How many men have dawdled away their success and allowed companions and relatives to steal it away 5 minutes at a time? "Tomorrow, did thou say?" asked Cotton. "Go to, I will not hear of it. Tomorrow, 'tis a sharper who stakes his penury against thy plenty, who takes thy ready cash and pays thee naught but wishes, hopes, and promises, the currency of idiots. Tomorrow! It is a period nowhere to be found in all the hoary registers of time, unless perchance in the fool's calendar. Wisdom disclaims the word, nor holds society with those that own it. 'Tis fancy's child, and folly is its father, wrought of such stuffs as dreams are, and baseless as the fantastic visions of the evening. Oh, how many a wreck on the road to success could say, 'I have spent all my life in pursuit of tomorrow, being assured that tomorrow has some vast benefit or other in store for me.' But his resolutions remained unshaken. Charles Reade continues in his story of Noah Skinner, the defaulting clerk, who had been overcome by a sleepy languor after deciding to make restitution. By and by, waking up from a sort of heavy doze, he took, as it were, a last look at the receipts, and murmured, "My head, how heavy it feels!" But presently he roused himself, full of his penitent resolutions, and murmured again, brokenly, "I'll take it to Pembroke Street tomorrow. Tomorrow." The morrow found him, and so did the detectives, dead. Tomorrow. It is the devil's motto. All history is strewn with its brilliant victims, the wrecks of half-finished plans and unexecuted resolutions. It is the favorite refuge of sloth and incompetency. Strike while the iron is hot, and make hay while the sun shines, are golden maxims. Very few people recognize the hour when laziness begins to set in. Some people it attacks after dinner, some after lunch, and some after 7 o'clock in the evening. There is in every person's life a crucial hour in the day which must be employed instead of wasted if the day is to be saved. With most people, the early morning hour becomes the test of the day's success. A person was once extolling the skill and courage of Mayenne in Henry's presence. "You are right," said Henry. "He is a great captain, but I have always 5 hours start of him." Henry rose at 4 in the morning, and Mayenne at about 10. This made all the difference between them. Indecision becomes a victim, and procrastination is its forerunner. There is only one known remedy for the victims of indecision, and that is prompt decision. Otherwise, the disease is fatal to all success or achievement. He who hesitates is lost. A noted writer said that a bed is a bundle of paradoxes. We go to it with reluctance, yet we quit it with regret. We make up our minds every night to leave it early, but we make up our bodies every morning to keep it late. Yet most of those who have become eminent have been early risers. Peter the Great always rose before daylight. "I am," he said, "for making my life as long as possible, and therefore sleep as little as possible." Alfred the Great rose before daylight. In the hours of early morning, Columbus planned his voyage to America, and Napoleon his greatest campaigns. Copernicus was an early riser, as were most of the famous astronomers of ancient and modern times. Bryant rose at 5, Bancroft at dawn, and nearly all our leading authors in the early morning. Washington, Jefferson, Webster, Clay, and Calhoun were all early risers. Daniel Webster used often to answer 20 to 30 letters before breakfast. Walter Scott was a very punctual man. This was the secret of his enormous achievements. He rose at 5. By breakfast time he had, as he used to say, broken the neck of the day's work. Writing to a youth who had obtained a situation and asked him for advice, he gave this counsel: "Beware of stumbling over a propensity which easily besets you from not having your time fully employed. I mean what the women call dawdling. Do instantly whatever is to be done, and take the hours of recreation after business, never before it." Not too much can be said about the value of the habit of rising early. 8 hours is enough sleep for any man. Very frequently 7 hours is plenty. After the 8th hour in bed, if a man is able, it is his business to get up, dress quickly, and go to work. "A singular mischance has happened to some of our friends," said Hamilton, "at the instant when he ushered them into existence. God gave them a work to do, and he also gave them a competence of time, so much that if they began at the right moment and wrought with sufficient vigor, their time and their work would end together. But a good many years ago a strange misfortune befell them. A fragment of their allotted time was lost. They cannot tell what became of it, but sure enough it has dropped out of existence. For just like two measuring lines laid alongside, the one an inch shorter than the other, their work and their time run parallel, but the work is always 10 minutes in advance of the time. They are not irregular. They are never too soon. Their letters are posted the very minute after the mail is closed. They arrive at the wharf just in time to see the steamboat off. They come in sight of the terminus precisely as the station gates are closing. They do not break any engagement or neglect any duty, but they systematically go about it too late, and usually too late by about the same fatal interval. Someone has said that promptness is a contagious inspiration. Whether it be an inspiration or an acquirement, it is one of the practical virtues of civilization. There is one thing that is almost as sacred as the marriage relation. That is an appointment. A man who fails to meet his appointment, unless he has a good reason, is practically a liar, and the world treats him as such. If a man has no regard for the time of other men, said Horace Greeley, why should he have for the money? What is the difference between taking a man's hour and taking his $5? There are many men to whom each hour of the business day is worth more than $5. When President Washington dined at 4, new members of Congress invited to dine at the White House would sometimes arrive late and be mortified to find the president eating. My cook, Washington would say, never asks if the visitors have arrived, but if the hour has arrived. When his secretary excused the lateness of his attendance by saying that his watch was too slow, Washington replied, "Then you must get a new watch, or I another secretary." Franklin said to a servant who was always late, but always ready with an excuse, "I have generally found that the man who is good at an excuse is good for nothing else." Napoleon once invited his marshals to dine with him, but as they did not arrive at the moment appointed, he began to eat without them. They came in just as he was rising from the table. "Gentlemen," said he, "it is now past dinner, and we will immediately proceed to business." Blücher was one of the promptest men that ever lived. He was called Marshal Ford. John Quincy Adams was never known to be behind time. The Speaker of the House of Representatives knew when to call the House to order by seeing Mr. Adams coming to his seat. Once a member said that it was time to begin. "No," said another, "Mr. Adams is not in his seat." It was found that the clock was 3 minutes fast, and prompt to the minute Mr. Adams arrived. Webster was never late at a recitation in school or college. In court, in Congress, in society, he was equally punctual. Amid the cares and distractions of a singularly busy life, Horace Greeley managed to be on time for every appointment. Many a trenchant paragraph for the Tribune was written while the editor was waiting for men of leisure, tardy at some meeting. Punctuality is the soul of business, as brevity is of wit. During the first 7 years of his mercantile career, Amos Lawrence did not permit a bill to remain unsettled over Sunday. Punctuality is said to be the politeness of princes. Some men are always running to catch up with their business. They are always in a hurry, and give you the impression that they are late for a train. They lack method and seldom accomplish much. Every businessman knows that there are moments on which hang the destiny of years. If you arrive a few minutes late at the bank, your paper may be protested and your credit ruined. One of the best things about school and college life is that the bell which strikes the hour for rising, for recitations or for lectures, teaches habits of promptness. Every young man should have a watch which is a good timekeeper. One that is nearly right encourages bad habits and is an expensive investment at any price. "Oh, how I do appreciate a boy who is always on time," says H.C. Brown. "How quickly you learn to depend on him, and how soon you find yourself entrusting him with weightier matters." The boy who has acquired a reputation for punctuality has made the first contribution to the capital that in after years makes his success a certainty. Promptness is the mother of confidence and gives credit. It is the best possible proof that our own affairs are well ordered and well conducted, and gives others confidence in our ability. The man who is punctual, as a rule, will keep his word and may be depended upon. A conductor's watch is behind time, and a terrible railway collision occurs. A leading firm with enormous assets becomes bankrupt simply because an agent is tardy in transmitting available funds as ordered. An innocent man is hanged because the messenger bearing a reprieve should have arrived 5 minutes earlier. A man is stopped 5 minutes to hear a trivial story and misses a train or steamer by 1 minute. Grant decided to enlist the moment that he learned of the fall of Sumter. When Buckner sent him a flag of truce at Fort Donelson, asking for the appointment of commissioners to consider terms of capitulation, he promptly replied, "No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move immediately upon your works." Buckner replied that circumstances compelled him to accept the ungenerous and unchivalrous terms which you propose. The man who, like Napoleon, can on the instant seize the most important thing and sacrifice the others, is sure to win. Many a wasted life dates its ruin from a lost 5 minutes. "Too late" can be read between the lines on the tombstone of many a man who has failed. A few minutes often makes all the difference between victory and defeat, success and failure. End of chapter 14. On Time, or The Triumph of Promptness. Chapter 15 of Pushing to the Front by Orison Swett Marden. Chapter 15. What a Good Appearance Will Do. Let thy attire be comely but not costly. Livy. Costly thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy, rich not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. Shakespeare. I hold that gentleman to be the best dressed, whose dress no one observes. Anthony Trollope. As a general thing, an individual who is neat in his person is neat in his morals. H. W. Shaw. There are two chief factors in good appearance: cleanliness of body and comeliness of attire. Usually these go together, neatness of attire indicating a sanitary care of the person, while outward slovenliness suggests a carelessness for appearance that probably goes deeper than the clothes covering the body. We express ourselves first of all in our bodies. The outer condition of the body is accepted as the symbol of the inner. If it is unlovely or repulsive through sheer neglect or indifference, we conclude that the mind corresponds with it. As a rule, the conclusion is a just one. High ideals and strong, clean, wholesome lives and work are incompatible with low standards of personal cleanliness. A young man who neglects his bath will neglect his mind. He will quickly deteriorate in every way. A young woman who ceases to care for her appearance in minutest detail will soon cease to please. She will fall little by little until she degenerates into an ambitionless slattern. It is not to be wondered at that the Talmud places cleanliness next to godliness. I should place it nearer still, for I believe that absolute cleanliness is godliness. Cleanliness or purity of soul and body raises man to the highest estate. Without this he is nothing but a brute. There is a very close connection between a fine, strong, clean physique and a fine, strong, clean character. A man who allows himself to become careless in regard to the one will, in spite of himself, fall away in the other. But self-interest clamors as loudly as aesthetic or moral considerations for the fulfillment of the laws of cleanliness. Every day we see people receiving demerits for failure to live up to them. I can recall instances of capable stenographers who forfeited their positions because they did not keep their fingernails clean. An honest, intelligent man whom I know lost his place in a large publishing firm because he was careless about shaving and brushing his teeth. The other day, a lady remarked that she went into a store to buy some ribbons, but when she saw the salesgirl's hands, she changed her mind and made her purchase elsewhere. Dainty ribbons, she said, could not be handled by such soiled fingers without losing some of their freshness. Of course, it will not be long until that girl's employer will discover that she is not advancing his business, and then, well, the law will work inexorably. The first point to be emphasized in the making of a good appearance is the necessity of frequent bathing. A daily bath ensures a clean, wholesome condition of the skin, without which health is impossible. Next in importance to the bath is the proper care of the hair, the hands, and the teeth. This requires little more than a small amount of time and the use of soap and water. The hair, of course, should be combed and brushed regularly every day. If it is naturally oily, it should be washed thoroughly every 2 weeks with a good reliable scalp soap and warm water, to which a very little ammonia may be added. If the hair is dry or lacking in oily matter, it should not be washed oftener than once a month, and the ammonia may be omitted. Manicure sets are so cheap that they are within the reach of almost everyone. If you cannot afford to buy a whole set, you can buy a file. You can get one as low as 10 cents, and keep your nails smooth and clean. Keeping the teeth in good condition is a very simple matter, yet perhaps more people sin in this particular point of cleanliness than in any other. I know young men, and young women too, who dress very well and seem to take considerable pride in their personal appearance, yet neglect their teeth. They do not realize that there could hardly be a worse blot on one's appearance than dirty or decaying teeth, or the absence of one or two in front. Nothing can be more offensive in man or woman than a foul breath, and no one can have neglected teeth without reaping this consequence. We all know how disagreeable it is to be anywhere near a person whose breath is bad. It is positively disgusting. No employer wants a clerk or stenographer or other employee about him who contaminates the atmosphere. Nor does he, if he is at all particular, want one whose appearance is marred by a lack of 1 or 2 front teeth. Many an applicant has been denied the position he sought because of bad teeth. For those who have to make their way in the world, the best counsel on the subject of clothes may be summed up in this short sentence: let thy attire be comely, but not costly. Simplicity in dress is its greatest charm, and in these days, when there is such an infinite variety of tasteful but inexpensive fabrics to choose from, the majority can afford to be well dressed. But no one need blush for a shabby suit if circumstances prevent his having a better one. You will be more respected by yourself and everyone else with an old coat in your back that has been paid for than a new one that has not. It is not the shabbiness that is unavoidable, but the slovenliness that is avoidable, that the world frowns upon. No one, no matter how poor he may be, will be excused for wearing a dirty coat, a crumpled collar, or muddy shoes. If you are dressed according to your means, no matter how poorly, you are appropriately dressed. The consciousness of making the best appearance you possibly can, of always being scrupulously neat and clean, and of maintaining your self-respect and integrity at all costs, will sustain you under the most adverse circumstances, and give you a dignity, strength, and magnetic forcefulness that will command the respect and admiration of others. Herbert H. Vreeland, who rose in a short time from a section hand on the Long Island Railroad to the presidency of all the surface railways in New York City, should be a practical authority on this subject. In the course of an address on how to attain success, he said, "Clothes don't make the man, but good clothes have got many a man a good job. If you have $25 and want a job, it is better to spend $20 for a suit of clothes, $4 for shoes, and the rest for a shave, a haircut, and a clean collar, and walk to the place, than go with the money in the pockets of a dingy suit." Most large business houses make it a rule not to employ anyone who looks seedy or even slovenly, or who does not make a good appearance when he applies for a position. The man who hires all the salespeople for one of the largest retail stores in Chicago says, "While the routine of application is in every case strictly adhered to, the fact remains that the most important element in an applicant's chance for a trial is his personality. It does not matter how much merit or ability an applicant for a position may possess. He cannot afford to be careless of his personal appearance. Diamonds in the rough of infinitely greater value than the polished glass of some of those who get positions may occasionally be rejected. Applicants whose good appearance helped them to secure a place may often be very superficial in comparison with some who were rejected in their favor and may not have half their merit, but having secured it, they may keep it, though not possessing half the ability of the boy or girl who was turned away. That the same rule that governs employers in America holds in England is evidenced by the London Draper's Record. It says, "Wherever a marked personal care is exhibited for the cleanliness of the person and for neatness in dress, there is also almost always found extra carefulness as regards the finish of work done. Work people whose personal habits are slovenly produce slovenly work. Those who are careful of their own appearance are equally careful of the looks of the work they turn out. And probably what is true of the workroom is equally true of the region behind the counter. Is it not a fact that the smart saleswoman is usually rather particular about her dress, is averse to wearing dingy collars, frayed cuffs, and faded ties? The truth of the matter seems to be that extra care as regards personal habits and general appearance is, as a rule, indicative of a certain alertness of mind, which shows itself antagonistic to slovenliness of all kinds. No young man or woman who wishes to retain that most potent factor of the successful life, self-respect, can afford to be negligent in the matter of dress, for the character is subdued to what it is clothed in. As the consciousness of being well dressed tends to grace and ease of manner, so shabby, ill-fitting, and soiled attires makes one feel awkward and constrained, lacking in dignity and importance. Our clothes unmistakably affect our feelings and self-respect, as anyone knows who has experienced the sensation, and who has not, that comes from being attired in new and becoming raiment. Poor, ill-fitting, or soiled garments are detrimental to morals and manners. The consciousness of clean linen, says Elizabeth Stuart Phelps, is in and of itself a source of moral strength, second only to that of a clean conscience. A well-ironed collar or a fresh glove has carried many a man through an emergency in which a wrinkle or a rip would have defeated him. The importance of attending to little details, the perfection of which really constitutes the well-dressed man or woman, is well illustrated by this story of a young woman's failure to secure a desirable position. One of those large-souled women of wealth in which our generation is rich had established an industrial school for girls in which they received a good English education and were trained to be self-supporting. She needed the services of a superintendent and teacher, and considered herself fortunate when the trustees of the institution recommended to her a young woman whose tact, knowledge, perfect manners, and general fitness for the position they extolled in the highest terms. The young woman was invited by the founder of the school to call on her at once. Apparently, she possessed all the required qualifications, and yet, without assigning any reason, Mrs. V absolutely refused to give her a trial. Long afterward, when questioned by a friend as to the cause of her seemingly inexplicable conduct in refusing to engage so competent a teacher, she replied, "It was a trifle, but a trifle in which, as in an Egyptian hieroglyphic, lay a volume of meaning. The young woman came to me fashionably and expensively dressed, but with torn and soiled gloves and half of the buttons off her shoes. A slovenly woman is not a fit guide for any young girl." Probably the applicant never knew why she did not obtain the position, for she was undoubtedly well qualified to fill it in every respect, except in this seemingly unimportant matter of attention to the little details of dress. From every point of view it pays well to dress well. The knowledge that we are becomingly clothed acts like a mental tonic. Very few men or women are so strong and so perfectly poised as to be unaffected by their surroundings. If you lie around half-dressed, without making your toilet, and with your room all in disorder, taking it easy because you do not expect or wish to see anybody, you will find yourself very quickly taking on the mood of your attire and environment. Your mind will slip down. It will refuse to exert itself. It will become as slovenly, slipshod, and inactive as your body. On the other hand, if when you have an attack of the blues, when you feel half sick and not able to work, instead of lying around the house in your old wrapper or dressing gown, you take a good bath, a Turkish bath if you can afford it, put on your best clothes, and make your toilet as carefully as if you were going to a fashionable reception, you will feel like a new person. 9 times out of 10, before you have finished dressing, your blues and your half-sick feeling will have vanished like a bad dream, and your whole outlook on life will have changed. By emphasizing the importance of dress, I do not mean that you should be like Beau Brummel, the English fop, who spent $4,000 a year at his tailor's alone, and who used to take hours to tie his cravat. An undue love of dress is worse than a total disregard of it, and they love dress too much who go in debt for it, who make it their chief object in life, to the neglect of their most sacred duty to themselves and others, or who, like Beau Brummel, devote most of their waking hours to its study. But I do claim, in view of its effect on ourselves and on those with whom we come in contact, that it is a duty as well as the truest economy, to dress as well and becomingly as our position requires and our means will allow. Many young men and women make the mistake of thinking that well-dressed necessarily means being expensively dressed, and with this erroneous idea in mind, they fall into as great a pitfall as those who think clothes are of no importance. They devote the time that should be given to the culture of head and heart to studying their toilets and planning how they can buy out of their limited salaries this or that expensive hat or tie or coat which they see exhibited in some fashionable store. If they cannot by any possibility afford the coveted article, they buy some cheap, tawdry imitation, the effect of which is only to make them look ridiculous. Young men of this stamp wear cheap rings, vermilion-tinted ties, and broad checks, and almost invariably they occupy cheap positions. Like the dandy, whom Carlyle describes as a clothes-wearing man, a man whose trade, office, and existence consists in the wearing of clothes, every faculty of whose soul, spirit, person, and purse is heroically consecrated to this one object, they live to dress, and have no time to devote to self-culture or to fitting themselves for higher positions. The overdressed young woman is merely the feminine of the overdressed young man. The manners of both seem to have a subtle connection with their clothes. They are loud, flashy, vulgar. Their style of dress bespeaks a type of character even more objectionable than that of the slovenly, untidily dressed person. The world accepts the truth announced by Shakespeare, that the apparel oft proclaims the man, and the man and the woman too are frequently condemned by the very garb which they think makes them so irresistible. At first sight it may seem hasty or superficial to judge men or women by their clothes, but experience has proved again and again that they do as a rule measure the sense and self-respect of the wearer, and aspirants to success should be as careful in choosing their dress as their companions, for the old adage, "Tell me thy company, and I will tell thee what thou art," is offset by this wise saying of some philosopher of the commonplace, "Show me all the dresses a woman has worn in the course of her life, and I will write you her biography." How exquisitely absurd it is, says Sydney Smith, to teach a girl that beauty is of no value, dress of no use. Beauty is of value. Her whole prospect and happiness in life may often depend upon a new gown or a becoming bonnet. If she has 5 grains of common sense, she will find this out. The great thing is to teach her their proper value. It is true that clothes do not make the man, but they have a much larger influence on man's life than we are wont to attribute to them. Prentice Mulford declares dress to be one of the avenues for the spiritualization of the race. This is not an extravagant statement, when we remember what an effect clothes have in inciting to personal cleanliness. Let a woman, for instance, don an old, soiled, or worn wrapper, and it will have the effect of making her indifferent as to whether her hair is frowsy or in curl papers. It does not matter whether her face or hands are clean or not, or what sort of slipshod shoes she wears, for anything, she argues, is good enough to go with this old wrapper. Her walk, her manner, the general trend of her feelings, will in some subtle way be dominated by the old wrapper. Suppose she changes, puts on a dainty muslin garment instead. How different her looks and acts! Her hair must be becomingly arranged, so as not to be at odds with her dress. Her face and hands and fingernails must be spotless as the muslin which surrounds them. The down-at-heel old shoes are exchanged for suitable slippers. Her mind runs along new channels. She has much more respect for the wearer of the new, clean wrapper than for the wearer of the old, soiled one. Would you change the current of your thoughts? Change your raiment, and you will at once feel the effect. Even so great an authority as Buffon, the naturalist and philosopher, testifies to the influence of dress on thought. He declares himself utterly incapable of thinking to good purpose except in full court dress. This he always put on before entering his study, not even omitting his sword. There is something about ill-fitting, unbecoming, or shabby apparel which not only robs one of self-respect, but also of comfort and power. Good clothes give ease of manner and make one talk well. The consciousness of being well dressed gives a grace and ease of manner that even religion will not bestow, while inferiority of garb often induces restraint. One cannot but feel that God is a lover of appropriate dress. He has put robes of beauty and glory upon all his works. Every flower is dressed in richness. Every field blushes beneath a mantle of beauty. Every star is veiled in brightness. Every bird is clothed in the habiliments of the most exquisite taste. And surely he is pleased when we provide a beautiful setting for the greatest of his handiworks. End of chapter 15. What a good appearance will do.